Hello and welcome to That Thing I Did for a Year, a podcast where we interview fourth-year University of Toronto students about experiences they had in a year away from school. My name is Ilya, I'm a fourth-year industrial engineering student, and today I will have the pleasure of talking to Milan, Arkady, Deborah, and Cindy. For the first time in front of the mic, but always behind production, is Arkady Arhangarotsky, a fourth-year engineering science student and the mastermind behind the operation. So today we're going to have Cindy conducting the interview, I think, for the first time. Let's get into it.
Excellent. So I am going to introduce you, but I'm going to give people a little bit of context. So what Ilya just shared with you is the standard introduction. There's music too, but the music is going to come in afterwards. For The Thing I Did for a Year, which is a new weekly student-run podcast here at the University of Toronto, where fourth-year engineering students discuss experiences from before, during, and after a year of work. The podcast's goal is to inform through genuine storytelling, so they're doing research, really. That's why I recommend it. Giving students a way to gain perspective, advice, and inspiration from their peers. So honestly, I've listened to all 10 podcasts, and they're awesome. I really recommend that you listen to them, like not right now, but shortly, maybe after, not at lunch, in a day or two. And so I'm clearly not the target audience. I'm probably about 2 decades too old, and and I'm not actually an engineer. But I have found this to be incredibly engaging and really instructive. And, as luck would have it, they are directly related to the theme of our 7th Community of Practice Conference, Unpacking Engineering Interns' Workplace Learning Experiences. So each podcast is a 45-minute to an hour deep dive into one student's experience. They're awesome. It's like a context. How did they get involved? What are their experiences like? What are some struggles they went through? What are some really proud moments? What did they learn? We don't have the luxury of doing that for each of the 4 panelists, so instead, we're going to be spending the next 45 minutes bringing you a cross-section of voices from the podcast, and then we're going to go into the past, and bring also a voice of a recent alumni who you may have heard about. He's been introduced like 7 times already, so Milan, who's become an invaluable member of the Troost ILead team. So the key question driving our discussion is going to be, what do engineering students learn when they move from university, which is an institution set up on purpose to teach them, to the workplace, which is an institution set up to achieve a whole set of organizational goals, most of which are unrelated to the direct teaching of interns, and yet they learn things. So we're going to try to find out what kinds of things they learn in these experiences. So on our panel today, we have Ilya, Deborah Raji, Arkady Arhangarotsky, and Milan Malkjovic. And I'm just going to introduce each of them, and then you get to stop hearing from me and start hearing from them. Ilya is a 4th-year industrial engineering student who split up his PEY, so the co-op, across, and this is a 12 to 16-month co-op, so distinct from some of the 4-month co-ops, but from financing, consulting, and amusement parks. Cool. He has been heavily involved in student leadership on campus over the last few years, ranging from Frosh Week. How many of you know that Frosh Week is spelled with an exclamation mark? Yeah, between the F and the R, there's a necessary exclamation mark.
Because we're excited.
Yeah, we're super excited. In case you hadn't been able to tell if you hear the band go by at all hours. To professional development, to Model UN, he's interested in bioengineering, human-centered design, and all of the other messy stuff that happens when organizations and technologies come up against human behavior, which is kind of what we do at ILead too. Yes. Deborah Raji is a senior in the engineering science program at the University of Toronto, majoring in the robotics option. She spent her professional experience here as a machine learning engineering intern at Clarify, and we like to count the number of times she uses the word Clarify, which she uses in really great ways. A leading computer vision startup. She later became involved in AI research, working on several projects investigating cases of bias in computer vision. Her enthusiasm for coding also led her to found the student initiative Project Include, which aims to provide summer coding boot camps for middle school students in low-income communities in the Greater Toronto Area and Ecuador. She loves a whole bunch of things, creating new projects with design thinking, a cappella singing, so we might have her sing her contributions, and long walks on the beach. Arkady Arhangarotsky is a 4th-year student in the robotics option engineering science. He did his PEY at Google, Repudia Robotics, and Shopify. On campus, he's a member of the self-driving car design team, and directly related to this panel, the podcast, he also produces and apparently is the mastermind behind the podcast That Thing I Did for a Year. Milan Malkjovic graduated from U of T's electrical engineering program in 2017 with a minor in sustainable energy. As a student, he completed his PEY at Hydra 1 as a protection and control intern and team lead. In his final year, he was the president of the Undergraduate Engineering Society. Following graduation, Milan worked at S&C Electric, a power systems manufacturing company, as an applications engineer. Milan is passionate about leadership, good for us, and people development, also good for us, and has recently returned to U of T to join us at Troost ILead, the Institute for Leadership Education and Engineering. In his spare time, he enjoys playing music, hiking, and mountaineering even in like this weather, which is like a new thing for me. I'm gonna try to experience this weather in some way other than the window. Finally, my name is Cindy Rottman, and I'm the Associate Director of Research at Troost ILead. I have not yet completed a 12 to 16 month engineering intern, but I understand applications, yeah, are still open for next year. Excellent, okay. You need engineering degrees? Okay, so please join me in welcoming our 4 panelists. I'm going to ask the first 2 questions of everybody, and then the last 2 questions, depending on timing. We'll have 2 for sure of the panelists, and possibly all 4. So first, I'm going to begin with Ilya. Why did you choose to go on PEY, and what did you do while you were there?
I chose to go on PEY, honestly, because I like too many different parts of industrial engineering, and I need to figure out what actually works in practice. So with that in mind, I chose to split up my PEY across a couple of companies doing different things. So first 4 months, I got to spend at RBC developing digital products to make the bank work better. I spent 8 months in management consulting at the Poirier Group, basically being a business doctor. And then the last 4 months, I was at Disney World, getting more people onto roller coasters and making lineups shorter restaurants.
Thank you. Deb, so why did you choose to go on PEY, and what did you do?
So I chose to go on PEY just because I was very curious about the startup space. I was very interested. I was like attending a lot of hackathons and just getting very intrigued with the whole tech scene and what was going on with startups. So that's why I did my PEY to Startup Clarify, which is a computer vision company in New York. Yeah, so like I kind of was, my role there was as a machine learning engineer, which effectively means that there was a research team that was sort of developing neural net architectures and sort of designing different ways to make software kind of understand images better, and we were really implementing it. So we were really coding it out and integrating it into the product itself.
Thanks, Deb. And Arkady, same question to you. So why PEY, and what did you do?
So prior to PEY, most of my internships that I had done had been all in software engineering, and because my major is in robotics, I wanted to try something closer to the robotics industry, and so I, through the PEY, found a job at Computer Robotics. My PEY is broken into 3 parts. The first 4 months were at Google, where I was working on the speech recognition team. Then I worked for 8 months at Computer Robotics, which is a company trying to build a cloud robotics platform. And then I spent 4 months at Shopify, which is an e-commerce platform that lets people build online stores, and I was working on their merchant analytics platform.
Thank you. And Milan, can you look back into the long time?
The distant future.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I got into engineering because of a little blurb that basically said engineering is a profession that helps people. And all the way through my first 3 years of university, I struggled a little bit to make my coursework feel tangible, with the exception of the projects that I was working on. That's where I felt like I was actually doing something. So PEY was the next outlet to actually go out and do something that was seemingly real to me, because that's where I found that I was actually doing pretty well. So I ended up working at Hydra 1 for 12 months, and my role was as a production and control engineer, which is basically making sure that the power system works the way it should. And 3 months into that, I also became the lead of a team that was dedicated to commissioning testing. So basically making sure that any new equipment across the province that was going in would work before it actually was energized.
Thank you. So it's interesting, you had some experiences across geography. Many of you did more than one experience during that 12 to 16 month period, which lets you to sort of compare organizational contexts quite a bit. So we're going to go in the same order, and I'm going to ask Ilya to tell us about a salient learning experience you had on PEY. It could be a proud moment, it could be a challenge. So describe the situation, and then let us know what you learned from it.
Right. So I was lucky enough to be in Orlando at Disney World when they were opening a new part to the park. So Toy Story Land opened this past summer, and we got to work on that directly. So pretty much from the second week that I got there, we were working a lot on the industrial engineering side of things. So everything was already built. That was thankfully done. But from there, it was a question of how do you improve the human operations of it? How do you get proper flow of people through that part of the park? How do you get the roller coasters working more efficiently? How do you make sure that the restaurant is working properly, and so on and so forth? And a lot of the focus was also on opening day, because opening day is always crazy. And just, it took so much work from so many people to make that thing go even okay. And then so much more work from people who weren't just in industrial engineering, but from just across the organization to make that more than okay, to make that great, to make that special for people. And at the end of it, like the big learning I got was just how much collaboration and just how much intelligent effort is required to make things actually work in the real world. I think before that I had a very gung-ho attitude, especially from school and from doing kind of smaller projects that, oh, you just think of it, you do it, you push it out there, and then it works. This was very much an eye-opener where, especially on a physical scale, just how much effort is required to make something great.
Thank you. Yeah. And Deb, can you tell us about a salient learning experience and what you learned?
Yeah, so I had a really interesting PUI where I got to, clarify let me do a lot of things, which is really good. So I kind of started off dealing with a lot of data and just like helping them with building training sets for machine learning models. And after about 4 months, everyone forgot I was an intern and they just kind of like threw stuff at me, which is great. And one of the things that I had to do early on was develop a moderation model. So effectively a computer algorithm to decide, to kind of like digest a bunch of content and decide what was safe for work, aka kind of like nudity free, and then what was like not safe for work. So what was going to be filtered out of the platform. When I started this project, I was like very ready, feeling very competent, and I kind of like walked through the process of developing a design doc and discussing it and building out the algorithm, and we shipped it, and it was super exciting. And then afterwards, we sort of like realized with the client that the algorithm that we had developed was pretty biased in an explicit way. So the training set that we had decided to use to represent sort of not safe for work or nudity was more, because it was like kind of derived from porn and things like that. So it was like more diverse than like the kind of stock imagery we were using to represent the concept of safe. So we ended up actually filtering out a disproportionate amount of the content of people of color from this platform. And that was like a very surprising, shocking OMG moment. And like, as a minority myself, I was like appalled. I was like, how could I be part of this? So yeah, like working with a lot of the people at the company, we sort of figured out ways to balance the data set. We sort of discussed sort of what this means and how that translates to issues of bias that exist in the industry as a whole. And it really led me to kind of like my next step. So the summer after my internship, I did another sort of research internship at the MIT Media Lab, literally working on this problem of bias in computer vision, and particularly facial recognition. So it is like a kind of industry-wide problem, and like that ethical dilemma or kind of like crisis really led to me like being awakened to the problem and feeling like a need and like kind of understanding the urgency of addressing these issues, particularly when these models and these algorithms are being deployed at like a really wide scale. So that was like my really big learning moment over my PUI.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, not great, but.
I was like, yeah, that's great.
Very funny. So, a salient learning experience, and then what did you learn?
So for me, there was kind of a dramatic moment in my time at Reputa where, so my original plan with Reputa was that I would be there from the start of September until the end of August in Zurich in Switzerland, working there. And kind of in the span of about 2 weeks from the start of December to around Christmas time, that plan changed completely where so I thought, so they were closing their Switzerland office at the end of December. And I was in the start of January moving to their other office, which was in Bangalore in India. And that came as a complete surprise to me. I knew they had an office there. I didn't expect to be there. The plan was for me to be in Switzerland for the full 12 months. So this happened very quickly. I think other people in my office, which was about 10, 15 people in Switzerland, sort of had like an inkling that this was going on and that the Zurich office wasn't doing very well, but for me it came as a complete surprise, and it also resulted in like most of the work that I had done between September and December being scrapped, which was really frustrating for me. It was sort of the first time what I really sort of took away from that was it was first experience where I've really seen that I'd spent a lot of my co-ops and things focusing on how can I improve my technical skills, and that was really kind of where my focus was. And this was an instance where really more important was everything outside of that, how I knew what was going around at the company around me and so on. And that ended up mattering considerably more than just like how quickly I'm able to code things up. So it generally like pushed me towards focusing a lot more on developing that side as opposed to the sort of technical skills side.
Thank you. And Milan, tell us about a salient learning experience and what you picked up from it.
Yeah, mine kind of spanned over my whole internship, I think. When I came in for the first maybe month and a half, 2 months, I couldn't really do anything because I was basically waiting for security clearance. So I would come in and do as much as I could and help out as much as I could and really just sit at my desk every day, which was unfortunate. And I quickly came to realize that nobody was going to come and check up on me, so if I wanted to get anything out of my experience, I would have to go look for it. So basically, 4 months in, I became a team lead as a co-op, which was super, super weird. And I ended up running a team of 3 others for the duration of my co-op, and basically being on the phone talking to field techs across the entire province who had no idea that I was some 21, 22-year-old kid, telling them which inputs to plug in and what signal to send, until pretty much the day before I finished. And I sent out an email thanking everybody, saying, hey, thanks, it's been a great experience, I really appreciated working with you.
Back to school.
And everyone just follows up and says, wait, what? You're going back? So it was kind of this idea of, I could have just sat there for 12 months and done nothing and collected a paycheck, and that would have been it. And I had seen other people doing it, but to actually go out and try to make something of my experience, I had to actually apply a little bit more initiative in that case. And it ended up being an experience that I had no idea was going to happen, and I learned so much through it about the industry as a whole, just because I took that little bit extra step.
It's amazing, and so much unlike a problem set, right? It's a little more diverse and a little more varied than a problem set. And this is something we discovered when we had a meeting before this podcast. It's really cool. We didn't do this on purpose when picking people, but your learning experiences happened at different levels. So Ilya's was really about team, the importance of team in putting something together. Deb's was really about the impact on society of decisions that you make as an engineer. Arkadi's was like organizational structure. Oh, we're packing up and going where? What's this all about? And Milan's was leadership, self-leadership at a self level. So it's really great the kinds of learning experiences that you had, that you were able to share with us, and it's really important that we in this room, both as people at the University of Toronto who might support you, and also folks in industry who might support you, give us some tips on what we can do. How can we best support you? So I think we're actually doing okay with time, so all 4 folks can answer, but for this I'm going to actually start with Ilya and Arkady, and then depending on time I'll move to Deb and Milan. So how can we being the folks in the room here, support your learning when you move from like problem set to the world of work? So maybe I'll start with Ilya.
Yeah, I think the thing that I found most helpful across like all different sizes of organization was when somebody gives, I would say, cascading levels of meaningful autonomy. Is I think the best way to put that.
Levels of meaningful autonomy.
So long words.
That's great.
But basically, giving autonomy early was something that is really engaging and also forces us to do that same thing we do at school with our problem sets, which is, I probably haven't been to lecture. Let's figure out how this works. Because a lot of work, honestly, a lot of work when you first come in there feels like you're starting to write a test when you didn't attend the lecture. Giving that in stages is something that really ramps up learning. The opposite of this is saying, this is your task, do it for a while. And the thing that I found to be a huge benefit to that, and the Poirier Group, which is a company, is a 20-person company I was at for 8 months, did an especially great job of this. It built trust very, very early on. So that was something that allowed me, and I saw other new employees there, to ramp up very, very quickly and learn very quickly. Because if you give concrete balance to what you're doing and say, stick to this, then that's what we're going to do. And we don't know your organization, so we're not going to question what it is that we are allowed to do. Versus in the case of this company, they gave continuous room to grow. They would say, this is your project, how would you do it? This is another slightly bigger project, how would you do it? And that was something that was really a great catalyst for learning. So
autonomy, but with some scaffolding as well.
oh, definitely. It's not just like, here, do it yourself, but it's more that it's coming from you rather than being given a sheet of paper and told that your job is the steps on this sheet of paper.
Thank you. Arcadi, do you have some tips for us?
Yeah, sort of to add on to what my sort of story before is just the degree of, I think it probably would have come as a surprise to my coworkers and employer in Switzerland, just how blindsided I felt by like that whole quick change of things. So I think I definitely would have benefited from a lot more kind of like focused attention from other people at the company. I think knowing that this is for many people, like on these kind of co-ops, their very first time in a company or like working in a company for a longer period, where that's like as an employer and as an employee, that's like the world that you live in for a long time. I think I would have really benefited from having a lot more sort of those things explained to me. On the technical front, all of that was good, but I think having had more explanation of like how a company works, that's I think where I had sort of like sought it out a little bit, but I think having had that more sort of reached out to me, that would have been very, very helpful.
Yeah, so making sort of the hidden curriculum of the organization a little more explicit to you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hey, so we actually are doing well with time, which is, for me, if any of you know me, I'm consistently 15 minutes late for everything, which Doug actually has changed in me. I am now on time for things. Awesome. So we do have time. So if Deb and Milan, you want to answer the same question before we move on to the last question. So how can we, employers and universities, support your learning?
So for me, like an interesting thing was similar to what Arkady mentioned about mentorship and like pairing people. But for me, that was like beneficial from like a technical standpoint, and that would have been more beneficial from a technical standpoint. So I also worked at like a smaller company, and I think after like 4 months, they were just like, oh, she's good. And then they're just like as in like, we don't need to we don't need to get involved with her, you know, she's got it after 4 months, right? And then they kind of just like left me to figure out technical stuff on my own. So I spent like probably way too much time like reading through docs, trying to figure out what was going on, you know, coding something and then being told like, oh, we already did this, and like, you just have to look at this really obscure part of the code base. So like, I think like in the same way that he was mentioning, having someone reach out to you in terms of organizational support and like teaching you about how the company works, kind of like from a structural perspective, I think having a technical mentor that's sort of consistently with you across the 16 months, like not just after the 4 months, then sort of assuming that you're okay and you're good, like sort of being with you consistently across the 16 months. Because I think my role, in terms of the team was very diverse. They worked on a lot of different types of problems. And although like I sort of was okay with doing the things I was working on in the first 4 months, you know, as my role sort of evolved at the company, it became increasingly difficult for me to figure out the technical stuff by myself. But I lacked that technical mentorship because they were just like, oh, she's fine, like doesn't need this anymore. So yeah, sort of having someone consistently with the student the entire way through that can sort of adapt, or even perhaps like a variety of technical mentors if the student is working on a variety of different projects that require different types of expertise. But definitely having someone there the whole time, like, and remembering that they are like a student and they're there to learn. So like their objective should really be focusing on, you know, having a certain amount of support while they're learning. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was helpful for you to have their confidence that you were doing well, but it would be nice to have somebody maybe you could approach periodically.
Exactly.
So that you don't have to reinvent the...
Yeah, like a dedicated person I know I can kind of...
Not somebody who's sitting with you the whole time, but somebody you can ask questions.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And Milan, if you have anything from like what universities can do as well, because the first three were really workplace focused. Although if you were going to say a workplace example, go ahead.
I'll lean toward workplace and I'll see what I can spin in it. But I'm a big fan of culture in general and understanding where cultures come from and why they work the way they work. And I think that if we want to leverage an intern to create as much value as an employee would, we need to treat an intern like any other employee. And I've seen too many times my friends going off on PUI or doing internships or starting new jobs for the first time, and they show up on day one and their computer isn't set up, and they have no way to work for the first 2 weeks. And it's these little cultural artifacts that send signals to interns that say, yeah, you're here, but you're not the same as everyone else. And I think that's a really big thing that we need to consider, just the little interactions that we have when we have a certain expectation for someone to perform a certain way, but aren't providing them the supports to actually go ahead and do that. And as far as universities, I think that there's a lot of value in creating that flow of communication between the university and the company, and I think that's something that we're actually starting to do really, really well here. But making sure that the student is looped into that process as well. So that the student has an idea, oh, there actually are people looking out for me, both at my home university and at my company, and they care about my development. Maybe I don't see it that tangibly day in, day out, but that focus is there, and I am getting the benefit of that as well.
Great, thank you. Oh, yeah, Deb.
Sorry, I just had like a quick add-on to
Yeah,
the
sure.
comment I made where about mentorship, both from like a cultural perspective and also like technical. I think it's really important for the organization to give space to the mentor and sort of credit to the mentor that is playing that role. Like it is a really hard thing to sort of take on a student and teach them how things work, both organizationally and technically. And I find that a lot of the people that end up sort of playing that role informally kind of get burnt out because they're doing their job and then they're doing a second job and they're not necessarily given either the space or the recognition to do that.
Yeah.
So as an organization, it's incredibly important to like actually account for that in their work day and sort of budget for that and support them in terms of taking on that role.
Yeah, so to support not only you, but also the potential mentors. I think that's really helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. So our very last question, and I'll begin with Milan and Deb, and then if there's time, we'll go to Ilya and Arkady. Looking back over your experience, there are some students here about to go on PEY, others who are in the midst of it, others who've just come back. What advice would you give students who are just about to go on PEY? We'll begin with Milan.
Don't settle for just the 2 feet in front of you, that's your computer screen. You don't have to just come in, day out, sit at your cubicle and go home. There's a breadth and wealth of knowledge at every organization, outside of the team that you operate in, outside of the discipline that you operate in, that you can leverage as simply as going up to somebody that you haven't met yet and saying, hey, I'd love to hear what you do here. And I think that that's one of the things that I benefited from the most, and that meant in some cases even taking the elevator down like 5 flights and going to a totally different department that I'd never seen before, just to get a sense of what was going on and how it contributed to the organization as a whole. So I think developing that broader organizational knowledge to get a sense of what the part that you play does in the context of the organization and how that ties into all the other people that are really doing everything they can day in, day out to make it as successful as it is.
Yeah, so the organizational context combined with what you did, which was take initiative.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Deb, do you have a suggestion for students?
Yeah, I always tell students like only apply to jobs that you want to do and organizations you want to work for. Like I'm like a very kind of like, well, through ILead's help, I like became a very value-driven person. So like looking at the missions and the values of the company and understanding what aligns and what doesn't align. Like I think there's a lot of students that sort of just blindly apply and then sort of take the first thing and rush the entire process. And I really don't think that's a good use of a year. Just because like you have this opportunity to sort of explore something for a year and get a really good experience sort of doing something that you think you might do for the rest of your life. Might as well make that a valuable experience. And for the employer, they definitely appreciate you as an employee more when you're sort of engaged and you're doing something you're excited about. So I always tell students like, don't blindly apply to every single job on Portal. And then, you know, take the first offer that comes to mind. Like definitely look at the organizational values and how they align with your values, and then pick something and apply to a job and organization that you actually want to work for, and prioritize those, and seek those out actively first. Yeah, and be very thoughtful when accepting an offer. It's better to do no PY at all than to do a PY that you're not actually fond of.
Yeah, so doing a bit of research also. Know
Yeah.
yourself, know your values, think about some of the organizations, get to learn some of their values, and think if you can come up with a fit together.
Exactly, yeah.
So it becomes a useful experience for everybody.
Yeah.
So we do have a couple minutes. Ilya, would you like to?
I think like those are really good points. I think the add-on there that is a conversation I often have with students is run intelligent experiments, and that's something that PY is.
Phrases.
But that's something that PY is like pretty ideal for, because you've got this confines 12 to 16 months during which you can try to figure something out about yourself. But like, I think the best example like I've thought of what I've seen of this is actually like Muhammad, who's sitting over here. I remember like when talking to him about his PY early, and after the fact, he had very, very concrete ideas of like, I want to see if this is true. I want to see if I would enjoy working at a small company. I want to see if I enjoy working as a software developer or a product manager. And these are, if you set these questions beforehand, that gives really good goal-orientedness to the work you're doing, instead of making it just a year of work experience. Now, doubtlessly, you're going to have learnings that you didn't anticipate, but having these learnings that you want to come away with just makes the time a whole lot more valuable, and also very much informs what you want to do with the time. It takes you less away from like, hey, is this a brand name company? And it takes you more into what am I going to learn about myself and about the industry here. So,
yeah. Run intelligent experiments. Okay, well, the Institutional Review Board on Ethics might have some questions about that. Yeah, excellent. Good tip. Excellent.
I never said publish.
Arkady, do you have a last word before we move to Q&A?
Yeah, I would just quickly add that, sort of thinking about it in terms of, aside from, we've been talking a lot about like workplace development, I think during PY, a lot of other students, I think, also feel this way, that you get a lot more time than you do during school for doing like personal development, and time sort of after 5 o'clock, which is usually still busy when you're in school, but when you're working, you actually have this time. I think being sort of deliberate from the start of PY, sort of thinking 16 months from now, where do I want to get in that point? What can I do with my sort of evenings? I think that for me would have saved me a lot of like, just in the first few months of that time, where I was really just kind of sort of aimless and not really knowing what, it really didn't expect that I didn't know what I would do at that time, because I'd never really had it for a number of years. And then sort of towards the end, I got into more just like hobbies, things that I didn't really have much time to do during school, and I'm already kind of missing. But I think, yeah, I would say being very, very deliberate about the kind of personal development you want to do, thinking about that before you even start going on those 60 months, what you want to get out of it outside of work.
Yeah, thank you. So I would like you to thank our panelists, and then we're going to do Q&A. But before, so we have to organize this because we're actually recording right now. So if you have a question, maybe stand up and quietly sort of move to the side and come around so that you're near the table so we can hear your voice with the question. But just let me, let's give a round of applause to our 4 panelists. I am going to open the floor, so if folks want to come up, possibly, maybe stand right around here so we can hear your voice. Questions? Is it the standing up here that's bugging people, or? Yeah, Roger, come on up.
We should be here.
We can possibly hear you.
Yeah, okay, I'll speak a little bit louder. Thank you very much. I found myself writing things down, and then I felt like I was doing a transcript of the conversation here, so I look forward to listening to the podcast after. Back to the point about what the university can do, the PEY programming here walks that line between industry and the academy. So could we get a little back to what would you like, when looking back now, what would you have liked in terms of support from this office that is trying to facilitate this learning to earning or learning to work type of transition?
Just raise your hand so I have a sense of who's. Yeah, what?
Yeah, sure. I think meaningful, non-cookie cutter preparation. I think it's easy to go out and say, okay, everybody's resume needs to look like this, and everybody's interviewing, so you need to do this in your interview. And I think that's something that as students we've fallen into very often, but the reality is that a software interview is going to look very different from some kind of technical interview in electrical engineering, for example. Pretty much every single interview I've done, I've rarely had to do any kind of technical question answering. It's almost exclusively been, who am I as a person, how am I going to fit in the team, what do I bring to the table that's maybe a little bit different. But that technical is almost understood and accepted that it's there. So preparing somebody to be able to go into a different kind of organizational context, and ahead of time recognize what that organizational context is going to look like, so that they're actually showing up, recognizing who their audience is, I think is really meaningful.
I think to build on that point, the idea of kind of like making it less of a, okay, you're a student, get a job process, and more of a, what are your possibilities? And that's a mindset shift that can be like characterized by, you know, what will get you from where you are now to where you want to be in terms of where you want to work. That can be characterized in terms of, you know, instead of saying like, so you want this kind of job, asking what kind of career do you want, what kind of experiences do you want to get out of it? Because there are going to be some people who say, I want to be a software engineer, but then there are going to be some people who say, I want this kind of job. I want to work with, you know, like a product team, or I want to work at, you know, like a small forward-thinking company. I want to work at a company with these values, which like Deb had brought up. So I think that would engage people in PEY, not just from a jobs perspective, but from like a very human perspective. It'll make people a whole lot more excited and engaged about the process.
Great. Anybody else have?
Yeah, I think I like ran into someone, I think it was Emily, and like I was talking to her about like how useful ILead is for job prep and interview prep. Like not to, you know, toot the horn, but like, but yeah, like I was involved in ILead like in third year, which was very fortunate because I learned a lot about like values and how to have kind of intelligent conversation around values and identify values in organizations and organizational culture and things like that. And like apparently I was talking to a recruiter recently and she was like, oh my gosh, like, you know, this language around values is so impressive. And I think like a lot of leadership development and working with ILead would be really beneficial for the ECC. I really feel like a lot of my
Excellent
segue. Yeah, sorry, that was, I don't know if that's already happening or not, but like I definitely think that like leadership education in general and teaching students like what to do and how to sort of stand out as leaders, you know, when they're although they're in their internship and they're learning, sort of being able to like take initiative, being able to recognize organizational change and organizational culture and have like a vocabulary around that would be super beneficial. And especially like, you know, during the interview process too, like having that language is super beneficial. So I feel like that was definitely something that I kind of, you know, was able to leverage, and I feel like a lot of students would be able to leverage that as well. Another kind of comment, which is similar to what Arkady and Ilya already mentioned, there's so many different types of interviews and so many different types of ways to present your resume depending on the industry. Something that I feel like that the university could sort of do better is, you know, just support students in the exploration process and the research process. What is it like? What does a good job look like for you? How do you actually research organizations to work for? How do you properly, you know, use the portal to sort of explore options? How do you come up with educated sort of questions to research once you arrive at an organization, or that, you know, questions that you want answered through your PY experience? How do you develop goals for your PY experience? Things like that. I don't feel like the conversation necessarily goes there. It's always like, I assume you want a job. I assume you know exactly which job you want to get. You know, here's how you get it. Versus like, you know, how do you know which job you want to get? And I feel like most students struggle with that question almost more than, you know, how do I go about getting this job? That's sort of like the next step after that.
No. Okay. So any more questions? Yes, Mike.
First, sort of an administrative one. If
Yes.
you could help a guy my age figure out how to access the podcast.
Yes. So
I'll send it out.
I think we might be close to age, but oh yes, okay. Milan was not my age. Yeah.
And then to pick up maybe on the theme of the front end, the preparation, the job interview and selection process, is there anything the panel could share regarding what employers could do differently or better to kind of present themselves and their opportunities in a way that would maybe help you see if there's a better or worse fit?
Well, thank you. Who would like to take this on? Yeah. All right.
I think there's a handful of things. Some are really simple, and again, going back to that culture piece that I like so much, little elements like responding, like just responding. I think that often students struggle with emails or resumes going out and having no sense where it's gone. It's just fallen into some black box, and then 4 months, like, I applied for a job last year. I got a job after I graduated. I applied to a whole host of other jobs as well, and I was 4 months into my new job when the company responded to me, asking for an interview. So little things, just as far as responding regularly or responding relatively quickly, and being receptive to the fact that students are looking for these kinds of positions is a really big one. And I forgot my second one, but I'm really hung up on that one. So if it comes back to me, I'll bring it up again.
I would just add that, I mean, for me, very, very valuable was being able to talk to some students who had worked at the places that I was applying. Hearing what that say, for me as a student, I think they already automatically know a lot of the kind of concerns that I have, and speak closer to the same language. That I think being able to talk to students that work at a company, that was very, very valuable for how the company presents itself.
I think just if I may pitch in on that, I think something that really differentiated some job descriptions and kind of initial forward-facing communication from others was how intentional the company was about the kind of person who they want to hire. Because there were some companies where it was clearly just I want a smart person in front of a computer, and there were others who felt very intentional. I could see the person who it was they wanted to hire, and it's of course from a technical perspective. These are technical jobs we're applying for, but also from I'm hesitant to use the word values again, but just what is not just what is. Okay, values. Not just what is important to you, but also the kind of work that you want to do. So that's something that would differentiate, at least for me, one design job from another design job. There's a lot of jobs where you would design an interface, but if this company says hey, we want somebody who is wants to be interacting with a small team on a daily basis. That is something where I see that and I can picture myself there, and I can much more easily decide, do I want to spend my time there?
Thank you. So we have two final folks who raised their hands. I don't know if they're looking to scratch or do you have questions? I think you have questions. Yes. Oh, you both have questions. Okay, excellent. And then after that, we'll.
I'm curious if you felt like you had the opportunity to speak freely on your internships and to present your ideas and create meaningful change. We talked a lot about mentorship, but I think as an industry, we need to realize that mentorship is a two-way street, so we learn as much from young people as they learn from us. And if we weren't able to speak freely, what can companies do differently to enable that?
Thanks.
I had a good experience with this where people at the company often remind me of how scared I looked the first 2 months. I was deer in headlights, OMG. So the company I work for.
Oh my God! In case anybody's my age. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I got that one.
Oh, wow. No, but so I actually so my PY company was in New York, which is this very big city. So I was super overwhelmed, and I think when I was applying and going through the process, it didn't register to me that this company is in this different city and you're actually going to be moving and your life is going to be changing a lot. None of that registered to me. I was just oh, job, oh, I'm doing this thing. So when I got there, I was wait, I'm in this different city. I was completely overwhelmed. And I think them just giving me the space, they could see I was scared, apparently. They told me that now. They didn't tell me that, thank goodness. But there were key people at the company that I can point to that really went out of their way to be come sit with us for lunch, come talk to me. And I just became more comfortable with them, and as I became more comfortable with them, I sort of started reaching out to more people at the company. And we had these all hands meetings, and the first 4 months or so, I was terrified to even nod my head in agreement with anything that anyone said. And just because I was able to sort of connect with individual people and loosen up, I suddenly became in a position to contribute and speak up more, and it really helped me in terms of my comfort level. So that's why I mentioned mentorship, just because these people were not necessarily formally mentors or assigned managers, but they went out of their way to personally reach out to me, and they kind of make me feel more comfortable. And you just need a couple of those people reaching out to the intern before they feel at least comfortable sharing with those people what their perspectives are on different things. And it's really great to have encouragement from those people to sort of validate ideas and say yeah, that's a really great idea, you should tell this person about it.
Yeah. And some of the informal spaces as well.
Exactly, yeah. So that really helped me a lot.
Excellent. Ilya, and then Peter's got a question.
First of all, thank you for asking that question. I think it's a really important question to ask. The best experience I had with that was at my second internship, where they had just a very simple but effective feedback process, which is they would ask, are you open to feedback? And if so, if you say no, that conversation ends there. If you say yes, then they would speak openly and freely. And that was something that I saw happening not only to me, but between other people at the company. So very, very quickly I realized that you do not get roasted for like speaking your mind, even if they don't think the feedback is accurate. The second component to that, like, I guess I've seen make me very comfortable giving feedback, was having the people I look up to at that company, like mentors and people in like higher positions, speak openly about mistakes they've made. Because like when you get to a company, you don't know what's right, you don't know what's wrong, you just know what is, and you're scared to question what is. And like, just having somebody who says, hey, what's happening right here is not perfect. Can like, this is something we could have done better. Then you say, oh, I can think of 5 other things you could have done better. But then now you're more comfortable sharing that, because you see that these people are okay with admitting to faults.
Yes, which is an important thing to do, admit. Peter, last question.
I wanted to first of all thank all the panelists. Very good feedback this morning. From an employer perspective, you all came in looking to gain certain experiences or wanted to focus on different learning environments for your individual interests. At what point in time did you decide, or what helped you decide to go with these companies? Was it part of the interview process, part of the research that you developed, or what could employers do better to let you know that the opportunities to work for those companies are what you're pursuing, what you want to pursue?
Post-PY.
Yes. Well, no, even
ahead of time.
for the PUI program to start, and then beyond.
So I'm going to ask one person to answer this question, because we're getting to time. Who would like to be the response?
I'm always happy.
Yeah, did you have any?
I also,
Okay.
well, I don't know, I was at another PY panel yesterday.
Take the rounds.
Full disclosure.
Full-time job. Yeah, it's a career.
And a lot of people mentioned the interview process as really a key component, and I have to agree with that. I had a lot of interviews for Clarify, but it was just like a really great time. Like it was just, they were talking about technical things, and you're realizing that, oh, this is the technical things that I want to learn about. Or if it's not a technical interview, if it's a behavioral interview, really sending a representative that is excited about the company, that, kind of spreads that excitement to the interviewee and makes the interviewee really comfortable. I find a lot of the students that were on that panel with me yesterday, and just a lot of students I talked to, cite the interview as like a key moment in terms of making that decision. If it's an enjoyable and properly structured and great interview process, then they usually use that as an indication of whether or not they want to work at the company.
Yeah. Actually, my ILead interview, full disclosure, was the most fun experience. The most fun interview experience that I had. It was really fun.
Yeah.
Thanks. Milan, you said you had a...
Yeah, just briefly, this actually ties into my post-university experience. So Hydro One was a company that was very well known, I suppose. So for me, going to Hydro One was easy because I knew what they did. I ended up working at a company called SNC Electric after I graduated, and in the same space, I knew I wanted to work in power systems. I was excited about sustainable energy, but I hadn't heard about SNC before. I had heard about the ABBs and the Siemens and the GEs of the world, but SNC is very much in that same space. And I think that what they've started to do now really well is actually doing that university outreach and getting into classrooms and showing up on campus and being accessible to people who might be interested in what it is that they do, and they bring things to the table that some of those massive companies don't necessarily. But if students aren't aware of them, then that connection is difficult. So I think being present on campus is a really huge piece.
And one of the great things folks can do is join our COP. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for participating in Troost ILead's first foray into podcasting. I am not a millennial, you might have noticed. A special thank you to Ilya and Arkady for allowing us to piggyback on their production. And to all 4 panelists, Ilya Deborah Raji, Arkady Arhangaratsky, and Milan Malkjovic, for sharing really important insights about that thing they did for a year. Our parting words come from the mouth of an inspirational leader, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Whatever your life's work is, may you do it well. Thank you.